Hello and welcome to Being Prodigy. Now put on your headphones and start learning. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description.
Previous chapter, we have discussed the behavior of the consumers. In this chapter as well as in the next, we shall examine the behavior of a producer. A producer or a firm acquires different inputs like labor, machines, land, raw materials, etc. Combining these inputs, it produces output. This is called the process of production. In order to acquire inputs, it has to pay for them. That is the cost of production. Once the output has been produced, the firm sells it in the market and earns revenue. The revenue that it earns net of cost is the profit of the firm. We assume here that the objective of a firm is to maximize its profit. A firm looking at its cost structure and the market price of output decides to produce an amount of output such that its profit reaches the maximum. In this chapter, we study different aspects of the production function of a firm. We discuss here the relationship between inputs and output, the contribution of a variable input in the production process and different properties of production function. Then we look at the cost structure of the firm. We discuss the cost function and its various aspects. We learn about the properties of the short-run and the long-run cost curves. Production function. The production function of a firm is a relationship between inputs used and output produced by the firm. For various quantities of inputs used, it gives the maximum quantity of output that can be produced. Consider a manufacturer who produces shoes. She employs 2 workers, worker 1 and worker 2, 2 machines, machine 1 and machine 2, and 10 kilograms of raw materials. Worker 1 is good in operating machine 1 and worker 2 is good in operating machine 2. If worker 1 uses machine 1 and worker 2 uses machine 2, then with 10 kilograms of raw materials, they can produce 10 pairs of shoes. However, if worker 1 uses machine 2 and worker 2 uses machine 1, which they are not good at operating, with the same 10 kilograms of raw materials, they will end up producing only 8 pairs of shoes. So with efficient use of inputs, 10 pairs of shoes can be produced, whereas an inefficient use results in production of 8 pairs of shoes. Production function considers only the efficient use of inputs. It says that worker 1, worker 2, machine 1, machine 2 and 10 kilograms of raw materials together can produce 10 pairs of shoes, which is the maximum possible output for this input combination. A production function is defined for a given technology. It is the technological knowledge that determines the maximum levels of output that can be produced using different combinations of inputs. If the technology improves, the maximum levels of output obtainable for different input combinations increase. We then have a new production function. The inputs that a firm uses in the production process are called factors of production. In order to produce output, a firm may require any number of different inputs. However, for the time being, here we consider a firm that produces output using only 2 factors of production, factor 1 and factor 2. Our production function, therefore, tells us what maximum quantity of output can be produced by using different combinations of these 2 factors. The short run and the long run. Before we begin with any further analysis, it is important to discuss 2 concepts, the short run and the long run. In the short run, a firm cannot vary all the inputs. One of the factors, factor 1 or factor 2, cannot be varied, and therefore, remain fixed in the short run. In order to vary the output level, the firm can vary only the other factor. The factor that remains fixed is called the fixed input, whereas the other factor which the firm can vary is called the variable input. In the long run, all factors of production can be varied. A firm, in order to produce different levels of output in the long run, may vary both the inputs simultaneously. So, in the long run, there is no fixed input for any particular production process. Long run generally refers to a longer time period than the short run.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support.
For different production processes, the long-run periods may be different. It is not advisable to define short-run and long-run in terms of, say, days, months, or years. We define a period as long-run or short-run simply by looking at whether all the inputs can be varied or not. Total product. Suppose we vary a single input and keep all other inputs constant. Then for different levels of employment of that input, we get different levels of output from the production function. This relationship between the variable input and output, keeping all other inputs constant, is often referred to as total product, TP, of the variable input. Average product is defined as the output per unit of variable input. Marginal product of an input is defined as the change in output per unit of change in the input when all other inputs are held constant. The law of diminishing marginal product and the law of variable proportions. The law of diminishing marginal product says that if we keep increasing the employment of an input, with other inputs fixed, eventually a point will be reached after which the resulting addition to output, that is, marginal product of that input, will start falling. A somewhat related concept with the law of diminishing marginal product is the law of variable proportions. It says that the marginal product of a factor input initially rises with its employment level, but after reaching a certain level of employment, it starts falling. The reason behind the law of diminishing returns or the law of variable proportion is the following. As we hold one factor input fixed and keep increasing the other, the factor proportions change. Initially, as we increase the amount of the variable input, the factor proportions become more and more suitable for the production and marginal product increases. But after a certain level of employment, the production process becomes too crowded with the variable input and the factor proportions become less and less suitable for the production. It is from this point that the marginal product of the variable input starts falling. Returns to scale. So far we looked at various aspects of production function when a single input varied and others remained fixed. Now we shall see what happens when all inputs vary simultaneously. Constant returns to scale, CRS, is a property of production function that holds when a proportional increase in all inputs results in an increase in output by the same proportion. Increasing returns to scale, IRS, holds when a proportional increase in all inputs results in an increase in output by more than the proportion. Decreasing returns to scale, DRS, holds when a proportional increase in all inputs results in an increase in output by less than the proportion. For example, suppose in a production process, all inputs get doubled. As a result, if the output gets doubled, the production function exhibits CRS. If output is less than doubled, the DRS holds, and if it is more than doubled, the IRS holds. Costs. In order to produce output, the firm needs to employ inputs, but a given level of output, typically, can be produced in many ways. There can be more than one input combinations with which a firm can produce a desired level of output. Short-run costs. We have previously discussed the short run and the long run. In the short run, some of the factors of production cannot be varied, and therefore, remain fixed. The cost that a firm incurs to employ these fixed inputs is called the total fixed cost, TFC. Whatever amount of output the firm produces, this cost remains fixed for the firm. To produce any required level of output, the firm, in the short run, can adjust only variable inputs. Accordingly, the cost that a firm incurs to employ these variable inputs is called the total variable cost, TVC. Shapes of the short-run cost curves. Now let us see what these short-run cost curves look like in the output cost plane. Previously, we have discussed that in order to increase the production of output, the firm needs to employ more of the variable inputs. This results in an increase in total variable cost, and hence, an increase in total cost. Therefore, as output increases, total variable cost and total cost increase. Total fixed cost, however, is independent of the amount of output produced and remains constant for all levels of production. Shapes of the long-run cost curves. We have previously discussed the returns to scales. Now let us see their implications for the shape of LRAC. IRS implies that if we increase all the inputs by a certain proportion, output increases by more than that proportion. In other words, to increase output by a certain proportion, inputs need to be increased by less than that proportion. With the input prices given, cost also increases by a lesser proportion. For example, suppose we want to double the output. To do that, inputs need to be increased by less than double. The cost that the firm incurs to hire those inputs therefore also need to be increased by less than double. What is happening to the average cost here? It must be the case that as long as IRS operates, average cost falls as the firm increases output.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support. Thank you and happy learning.